All this information that we're coming across so far is proof that you were right. You were right about the economy not being good. You were right to believe that things were not what we were being told. You are right to believe that all the data we have been getting shoved down our throats over the past couple of years leading up to the election has been false. And actually, there was a story recently that was released that proves this. All we heard leading up to the election is that unemployment is low and wages are growing and Americans are prospering right now and the economy is on fire. That's basically the narrative we heard for a while. Also, just go across any major city throughout the country and you're starting to see more and more blight, more and more homelessness, more and more stores and shops being closed up for good, and empty retail space that's just starting to pile up. And people are supposed to believe that this is still the greatest economy that we've ever seen. In fact, this guy who wrote this story, who's bringing all the real data to light here, he says that he used to drive into Washington, D.C. to work every day, and literally you see homeless encampments outside of the Federal Reserve right now. I mean, that's how bad it's getting over there. And I've only been to Washington, D.C. once, but I think that was back in 2019 or something I was there. When I was there, guys, I never saw a single homeless person. So things must have gotten pretty bad. Things have been deteriorating quite a bit since then. So the first thing that this story talks about, and I'm not going to get political here, but this is an interesting thing to note. They say that Democrats seem to be more inclined to believe the economic indicators that are reported, like the unemployment figures, the GDP figures, and the inflation numbers, all of that stuff, whereas Republicans seem to be more inclined to believe what they are seeing with their own two eyes. But I would think pretty much everybody would think more like the Republican way, in the sense that seeing is believing, guys. Like, you can be told whatever you want, but whatever you see in your local town or area is the real reflection of what's going on. Who cares what's being said by the government? And it also turns out that voters' perception of what's really happening in the economy was far more accurate than what we were being told. This is now a fact that is out there in the open. I have the story linked below for anybody who wants to go and check it out. But here's the facts and here's the data. Let's take unemployment, for example. The experts, they look at U3 unemployment numbers, and this number is misleading in several different ways. The first thing is it counts people employed who are millions of people who are unwillingly underemployed. That is, if you work only a few hours a week while searching for a full-time job, you count as employed. Second thing is it no longer takes into account many Americans who have been discouraged that are no longer trying to get a job. And the third thing is it does not account for the meagerness of any individual's income. So you could be homeless on the streets, making an intermittent income and incapable of keeping your family fed, and the government would still count you as employed. So the unemployment figures are grossly underreported, which is something that we have talked about extensively here on the channel. And during the time of the election, the unemployment figure stood at about 4.2%. That figure is literally counting homeless people that might make a few $100s a month as employed. But if you count people that can't find full-time work as unemployed, and you count people who make $25,000 a year or less below the poverty line as unemployed, the percentage jumps up to a whopping 23.7% unemployment rate in this country, guys. That sounds a lot more realistic. And let's face it, if you are living below the poverty line, you can't make more than a couple $100s a month, you are essentially unemployed. Even though you technically do earn a small income, it's not enough to actually get you anywhere. And this means about 1 in every 4 people in this country is technically unemployed by that definition. And this brings me to another point about unemployment. One of my viewers, Jordan, who writes me emails regularly, he used to work for a local unemployment office, and now we don't have local unemployment offices anymore. Now the BLS is in charge of collecting unemployment data nationwide. And one thing that he has told me repeatedly in plenty of different emails is that the unemployment data that we receive today is not accurate because it's collected at a national level and it's no longer collected at a local level. He told me when unemployment was calculated at the local level, the accuracy rate was 99.9% on the first release of the data. Now, they're off by 3 to 6%. In other words, 5 or 10 million jobs per month for the entire country. And the problem with that is decisions that are being made by the government and the Fed are based on the unemployment data. But if the unemployment data is consistently wrong, they get the latest unemployment reading and they decide whether or not we're going to raise interest rates, they decide whether or not the economy is doing well based on data that is fundamentally wrong month after month, well then everything is wrong. All the decisions being made are wrong. All the other data that's being collected that surrounds unemployment is wrong as well. It's a huge problem. And so the only way that this problem gets solved is going back to how things used to work and start collecting unemployment data on the local level, citywide, countywide. That's where unemployment data needs to be collected in order to have a true reflection of what's going on in this country. And if we use the criteria that we just mentioned a little while ago about if you're below the poverty line or you can't find a full-time job as also being unemployed, I guarantee you we would see the official unemployment numbers in this country absolutely skyrocket, guys. And of course, this problem bleeds into all other areas of the economy as well. Let's take a look at earnings. That's what they keep telling us. Americans' earnings are outpacing inflation, right? Because the weekly earnings that the government tracks, they track full-time wages, but exclude both the unemployed and those engaged in lower paid part-time work. They say that the US median income is at $61,900 per year. But if you track everyone in the workforce, and if you include part-time workers and unemployed job seekers, the results are much different. The research shows that the median wage is actually about $52,300 per year. And so Americans are making about 16% less than what the government figures are actually telling us they are right now. So that is a huge miss. And of course, the biggest thing that we've been lied about ever since it's become a major problem has been inflation, okay? And here's the problem with the way that they track inflation. Lots of problems, but here's a big one. The CPI looks at a basket of goods, about 80,000 goods and services across the economy, okay? The problem is people with modest incomes, meaning that they just make a normal wage, they only purchase a fraction of the 80,000 goods that the CPI tracks. And they spend a much greater share of their earnings on basic necessities like groceries, healthcare, and rent. So when you see prices for eggs, insurance, and rent rise faster than the price of luxury goods or second homes, for example, the CPI then underestimates the impact of inflation for pretty much everybody. And that's exactly what we saw happen ever since they've been saying inflation was high and then inflation is coming down. So what they do is they look at what people actually buy. So they look at an alternative indicator that excludes many of the items that only the well-off and the wealthy tend to purchase. They focus more on prices for basic necessities, the things that most lower income and middle income families typically can't avoid spending money on. And what the results show is that since 2001, the cost of living for Americans with modest incomes has risen 35% faster than the CPI will tell you it has, which means that the resources that are required to maintain the same level of working class lifestyle over the past 2 decades has risen much more dramatically than we've been led to believe. So people are waking up to this. People are realizing that, yeah, these numbers don't reflect my reality. We've talked about this countless times here on the channel, but it's interesting to see it finally being uncovered in a meaningful way, where the data is showing us that, yeah, this is all fake. And it's not even so much that the data is fake, but it's more like the way that it's collected and the way that is presented is fake. The data in its raw form is there, but the way that we get the finished version of it is nowhere near a reflection of reality for most people. So in 2023, the CPI indicated that inflation went up by 4.1%, but the true cost of living, when measured the way we just talked about here, rose more than twice as much at 9.4%, guys. And what have I been saying here on the channel over and over again? When we look at the government's number, whatever it is for inflation, we can just easily say it's double that right now. So the current reading is 3%, you can say it's easily 6%. And when the inflation is notably higher than what is being reported, and when the wage growth is notably lower than what's being reported, that's a recipe for a slow economy, which is where we're at right now. In fact, what all this data tells us is that purchasing power actually fell by 4.3% in 2023. And so people who have been feeling the pinch with their monthly budget and seeing that their money just isn't going as far as it used to, that's not an imagination, that's reality. And only now we are uncovering that it has been in fact fake the entire time. I knew this is something intuitively I knew, and it's something that we've talked about dozens of times here on the channel, but it's interesting now, at least there is some hard data that proves this. So I encourage everybody to go and look at this for themselves. If you don't believe what I'm saying and you think it's all just nonsense, please check it out for yourself. All the information I'm talking about here is linked down below. And of course, the same thing is happening with the GDP figures as well, but I don't want to get into that because I have a few other stories I want to talk about here before this video gets too long. Wow, look at this peacock, guys. That thing's on full display right there. They're on the roof too. One thing we have to talk about is all of the store closures and all of the layoffs that are happening just over the past week, okay? Jo-Ann Fabrics, they're gonna be closing 500 stores, guys. 500 stores. So right off the bat, let's think about it. How many people work at each Jo-Ann Fabrics? I don't know, 10 on the low side? That's at least 5,000 people. If it's 20 people that work at each one of these Jo-Ann Fabrics, now we're talking 10,000 people losing their jobs, guys. So they're gonna see stores closing in all 50 states across the country, and the most closures are gonna take place in California, Florida, Indiana, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington State. So watch out for your local Jo-Ann Fabrics closing pretty soon. And they've been having some trouble for a while. Jo-Ann Fabrics has filed for bankruptcy twice just in the past year. So this isn't exactly a huge surprise, but just another indicator that the economy is not going nearly as well as we've been told, just like all the other data we've been talking about here presents to us. Another huge layoff announcement that just came out is Southwest Airlines. They're going to be cutting about 1,700 jobs, which is unprecedented for this company, and that's about 15% of its corporate workforce. So the company's been around for 53 years, okay? And this is the worst layoff they've ever seen. What does that tell you about the current state of the economy? To me, it's obvious that things are not going well and people need to wake up. But I guess some people just need to actually get slapped in the face with reality before they actually do wake up. That's just how it goes sometimes for people. So supposedly this big layoff of 1,750 people is supposed to happen by April of this year. They say the same thing that every other company performing layoffs says, that we're building a leaner organization and increased clarity regarding what is most important. We're going to have quicker decision making and a focus on getting the right things done with urgency, just like we had in the very beginning stages of our company. And of course, this is a good thing for the share prices of Southwest, right? Because investors have been pressuring the Southwest leadership to find ways to cut costs. And this is the most effective and common way that companies are doing so right now. They're just performing mass layoffs. That's the easiest way to cut costs and boost profits without doing much else. And the biggest one of all was Chevron. Chevron says that they're going to be cutting 20% of its workforce in an effort to reduce costs up to $3 billion by the end of 2026. So they're thinking this is going to be about 8,000 people roughly that are going to be losing their job. And the interesting thing is that because oil is actually cheap right now, like $71 a barrel, this is actually bad news for companies like Chevron and all these other big oil and gas companies that pull crude oil out of the ground. Because the lower the cost of oil, then actually the less money they make and the lower their profits go. So they actually benefit when the price of oil goes up and gas prices are through the roof. And that's when you see more of these companies start to drill when the price is higher. Makes sense, right? If you're going to get a higher reward for the product you're producing versus a lower reward, what's going to make more sense? What's going to be a higher incentive? But the point is, it's another 8,000 people, guys. You can say it's going to be anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people gone with Jo-Ann Fabrics, another 8,000 people with Chevron, another 1,750 with Southwest Airlines. And those are just the ones I know about now off the top of my head from the little bit of research I've done on this. And who knows how many other layoffs have happened over the past week that we haven't heard about, or maybe that you heard about and I didn't mention here. But I'm actually happy that the truth is starting to come out and people are starting to realize that things are not as good as we've been told over the past few years, because that's how we can start bringing things back to reality. Once people realize that all of these supposed gains in the stock market and the housing market and everything else have essentially been fake, we can start resetting prices. We can start bringing the cost of goods and services back to reality. Or maybe we'll just be in a new reality where you have to accept that inflation has been far worse than what was reported, and you either have to catch up or get left behind. I guess we'll see where things go. But the way things are going right now, and with the amount of layoffs we keep hearing about, it looks like we are headed for a pretty massive recession at some point in the near future. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.